Support for this podcast comes from St. Alphonsus Sports Medicine, offering services for sports injury and recovery, with physicians and athletic trainers who provide treatment for fractures, dislocations, sprains, strains, and other sports-related issues. More information on services at stalphonsus.org.
The Boise State Public Radio app. News, music, and more.
Idaho Matters.
Morning Edition.
All things considered.
The Connector.
And more.
And more.
You can take us wherever you go and stay connected. Without it, you're missing out. Download it free.
You can also communicate using the Talk to Us tab.
The Boise State Public Radio app.
This is the Connector Idaho Daily News from Boise State Public Radio. Good Monday, I'm Troy Oppie, and here are this morning's headlines. We are remembering former governor and public official Dirk Kempthorne this morning. He died on Friday at the age of 74. AC Boise makes an impressive debut in the USL Cup series, where they play a higher tier of competition, and preparing for the primary. Early voting begins in many places today. Flags across the state are at half-mast until further notice in honor of former governor and public official Dirk Kempthorne, who died Friday at the age of 74. He had battled cancer. Kempthorne served as mayor of Boise in the mid-1980s and then was elected to the U.S. Senate in 1992. He decided to run for Idaho governor in 1998 and won 2 terms at the Idaho State House. In 2006, he was nominated by President George W. Bush to be Secretary of the Interior and served until Bush left office. Remembrances and honorary statements poured in over the weekend. Bush, in a statement, called him, quote, one of the finest public servants I ever knew because he was one of the finest men. Governor Brad Little, a longtime friend of Dirk Kempthorne's, said he left an enduring mark on the state of Idaho. Statements also came from across Idaho's congressional delegation, from the Boise mayor's office, and the state's major political parties. Flags in Idaho will remain at half-staff until Kempthorne's memorial, a date for which has not yet been announced. A full remembrance of former Governor Dirk Kempthorne is coming up in a few minutes in this podcast. Early voting for Idaho's primary election begins today in many counties across the state. All 105 legislative seats are up for grabs, and our reporter James Dawson has some highlights to watch out for.
Last election cycle's most expensive legislative race could be in for a repeat. It'll be the 3rd time Senator Jim Woodward and former Senator Scott Herndon have faced off for the Republican nomination in North Idaho's District 1. Both candidates have raised about $75,000, with the more conservative Herndon slightly ahead. Staying up north, Representative Lori McCann has outraised her seatmate, Senator Dan Foreman, nearly 4 times over, as she aims to undo the gains the far right have made in the Idaho Senate in recent years. Speaking of conservative gains, each member of the so-called Gang of 8 are having to defend their seats after one term. Senators Josh Cole, Glenita Zeiderveld, and Christy Zitto, along with Representatives Lucas Kaler, Clint Hostetler, David Levitt, Kent Marmon, and Faye Thompson face more moderate challengers. The group has been steadfast in opposing increased state spending and supporting a conservative social agenda. Challengers have outraised half of the incumbents so far, with a few weeks left to go until Election Day. James Dawson, Boise State Public Radio News.
You can read more about races to watch this election and get voting details on our website, boisestatepublicradio.org. Governor Brad Little and many of the state's agency heads will travel to Twin Falls County on Thursday this week as the governor makes the town of Filer capital for the day. This is part of a series of visits the governor has done over the years, a way to connect with and bring state government to Idaho's smaller communities. This Thursday, the Governor's Roadshow will be at True Leap Technologies from 10 a.m. to noon, and then at Filer High School from 1:15 to 3. Other attendees include the Lieutenant Governor and heads of the state departments of Agriculture, Water Resources, Education, Insurance, and Financial Management. An early morning car crash Sunday in Lewiston involving a city police officer is being investigated by Idaho State Police. In a news release, ISP says a Lewiston police SUV and a private Cadillac Escalade driven by 29-year-old local resident Tristan Weeks collided at D Street and 5th about 1:15 in the morning Sunday. Both drivers were transported with minor injuries. ISP is seeking witnesses, specifically anyone who saw the Escalade or knows the whereabouts of Tristan Weeks prior to the accident. The warmest winter on record in Idaho has many ag experts expecting a difficult growing season this year. That's because without an extended hard freeze of a normal winter, pests like aphids or diseases like potato blight can persist and get a jump start on the next growing season.
We're expecting to see quite a few problems with volunteer potatoes this year in the fields.
That's University of Idaho Associate Professor and Seed Potato Specialist Kasha Duhlman, based in Idaho Falls. Volunteer potatoes grow from remnants left behind in the usual harvesting process. Normally, the hard freeze kills them off. When that doesn't happen,
It's possible that some infections from the previous year, even if we had low levels, we could start being exposed to that earlier in the season in more places.
infections like blight, which is usually rare in Idaho, or potato virus Y, that's a problem for seed potato growers. And volunteer potatoes popping up in rotated fields, now growing a different crop, are the equivalent of weeds for farmers, which can absorb resources and shrink yields. Duhlman says the mild winter, increasing input costs for supplies like fertilizer, and especially the predicted water shortages are all likely to make this a very difficult growing season for Idaho's farmers. The Idaho Steelheads face a must-win Game 4 playoff game tonight, trailing 3-0 in their best-of-7 Kelly Cup playoff series against the Allen Americans. Idaho unable to hold an early lead in Sunday's Game 3, losing in overtime. The puck drops tonight in ICCU Arena in downtown Boise. Game 4 is at 7 p.m. An impressive debut this weekend for Athletic Club Boise in the USL Cup. That's the multi-league tournament played throughout the season between the USL's League One, which is home to AC Boise, and the USL Championship League, one competition tier higher. AC Boise went into Las Vegas and was tied with the Lights 1-1 at the end of regulation. The game went to a penalty kick shootout. Boise coach Nate Miller swapped goalies in stoppage time. He wanted Javier Garcia for the shootout, and Garcia delivered. Boise got the win on kicks 4-2. A big second point for the USL Group 1 Cup standings. Next up for Boise, back home this Saturday against Chattanooga. Boise Brewing is celebrating another win for its Black Cliffs American Stout. The dark beer earned a silver medal late last week at the World Beer Cup. This is a global competition for beer. Black Cliffs is one of the first beers designed and brewed by Boise Brewing's head brewer Lance Chavez. It won gold at the World Beer Cup in 2018 and 2 years ago took the bronze medal. The World Beer Cup bills itself as the most prestigious beer competition in the world. This year, more than 250 judges evaluated beers from nearly 1,700 breweries, representing 50 countries. And one note, Boise Brewing has been a financial supporter of Boise State Public Radio. More now on Dirk Kempthorne, Idaho's former governor who died Friday. He spent much of his life in public service, with friends and former colleagues remembering his infectious personality and his drive to change Idaho for the better. Our James Dawson has this remembrance.
Aside from his piercing blue eyes, one of the first impressions people got of Dirk Kempthorne was his photographic memory for names, according to his former communications director and budget chief Brian Whitlock. Even a decade later, Whitlock says Kempthorne would immediately recognize people on the campaign trail, out on the town, or even in faraway airports.
It didn't matter whether it was the mayor or the barber or the newspaper editor in that community. He not only knew their name, he knew the spouse's name, and in many cases, the kids' names. Once he even knew the dog's name.
Those are the skills of some of the most memorable politicians, regardless of their party affiliation. Whitlock says that was one of his former boss's keys to success.
When you're working on behalf of 1 million or 1.5 million people, and yet people are able to make a personal connection to you because you've made that personal connection to them.
Kempthorne wasn't an Idaho native. In fact, he was born and raised in California, the state that shall not be named. After graduating high school, he made his way north to study political science at the University of Idaho. There, he was elected student body president and became friends with Idaho's current governor, Brad Little. During a 2020 interview with U of I alumni, Kempthorne said he would often visit the university's farmland to work on his public speaking.
I took a course called Voice Diction and Oral Interpretation, and I'd go out there where you'd find a number of cows, and they'd be grazing, and I'd go and I'd give them a speech, and they'd all come up to the fence. I did pretty good in that class.
A trip to Boise one winter to lobby on behalf of the student body would sow the seeds for one of his biggest legacies during his time as governor. As the group drove back to Moscow, the driver hit something on the icy roads and flipped the car several times.
Had it not been for that large snowbank right there outside of Banks, we'd gone into the river. We ended up with the roof on the pavement. Our stuff was scattered everywhere. We were so fortunate to walk away from it. But when I became governor, I said, that's something we have to correct.
It would take a few decades until he could make good on that promise to make roads safer, with stints as the mayor of Boise and as a U.S. senator in between. Idahoans elected him as the state's top leader in 1998 and again in 2002. Toward the end of Kempthorne's tenure as governor, he proposed that the state should, for the first time, borrow money against future federal road funding. Lawmakers could then use that money to build safer highways and retrofit existing roads to save lives. Whitlock says it was a radical idea in 2005.
We'd always been a pay-as-you-go state. And because we were a pay-as-you-go state, you could just never get ahead of the curve.
Such large amounts of debt worried some lawmakers to the point that they initially rejected the idea. That's when Kempthorne called a press conference with a stack of bills on his desk.
He took the first bill off the top of the stack, pulled out his veto stamp, and he stamped it. And then he pulled the next bill off, and he stamped that one.
Whitlock says it became known as the Veto-Rama. In all, Kempthorne struck down 8 bills before explaining why he took such drastic action.
He looked at the cameras and delivered a very strong message to legislators that these are the first 8, and there are more to come, and we'll keep doing this until we can get this Garvey program resurrected and moving forward again.
And it worked. State transportation officials say fatalities dropped by 89% after Garvey-funded projects were completed, along with significant drops for serious injuries and overall crashes. While Kempthorne served as a Republican, his priorities stretched across ideological lines. Take, for example, his full-throated support for childhood vaccinations and establishing a voluntary database to track them. Here he is during one of his State of the State addresses.
I set a goal of reaching a 90% immunization rate for Idaho children under the age of 3. Today, for the first 3 series of shots, Idaho's rate is above 90%. By the time children enter school, the rate is approximately 95%.
Now, that rate for kindergartners is 75%, according to Idaho Education News, after lawmakers over the years repealed vaccination requirements. He also worked to establish a minimum wage for farm workers and tried to get rid of the 2/3 majority required to pass a school bond. At the same time, he decried federal overreach, like when he pushed back against expanding the Coeur d'Alene Superfund site at Bunker Hill in the late 90s and early 2000s.
I told EPA that I am so frustrated with them that I'm on the verge of inviting them to leave the state of Idaho.
He and other local officials won that fight. After serving nearly 2 terms as governor, former President George W. Bush tapped Kempthorne to be his Secretary of the Interior in 2006. He stayed in the D.C. area after that, working as the president of the American Council of Life Insurers until 2018. Kempthorne is survived by his wife Patricia and his children Heather and Jeff. James Dawson, Boise State Public Radio News.
And thanks for listening to The Connector, a production of Boise State Public Radio. Our digital strategy manager is Lacey Daly. Our news director is Sasha Woodruff. Our general manager is Tom Michael. And I'm Troy Oppie. Catch you again tomorrow morning from Boise State Public Radio News.
If you like podcasts like this, explore more from the Boise State Public Radio podcast family. There you'll find a mix of daily news, Idaho Voices, and in-depth series on a wide range of topics. I'm talking wild horses, political scandals, sustainable ranching, and militia groups in a post-January 6th world. Wherever you get your podcasts, just search Boise State Public Radio to find what Idaho's NPR station has in store for you.